So there's a great flaw in this whole way of thinking about memories, and attempts to find memory traces have failed over and over and over again. I think that the only alternative really is the idea of resonance across time. Morphic resonance is my own particular hypothesis of how this might happen. Similar patterns of activity resonate across time, should convey a pattern of nervous activity, which can happen in different cells from the ones in which the pattern was set up in the first place. And this helps to explain why memories can survive brain damage. Often after severe brain damage, people can get their memories back. They slowly recover them, which wouldn't be possible if the memories were stored in the damaged cells themselves. There's also a remarkable phenomenon that happens to people with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia called terminal lucidity. Often it happens that people shortly before they die, in the day or two before they die, become lucid, even if they've been completely confused for years. And they start recognizing people, asking questions, know what's going on, become aware of their situation. They become lucid. It's called terminal lucidity because it happens shortly before they die. Now, that would be completely impossible if the memories were all stored in the brain cells that had degenerated. However, the effect of brain damage on memory, you see, can also be explained in a resonance theory by affecting the ability of the brain to tune into or receive the memories. If I damage your TV set so that it could no longer receive sounds or process sounds, you just have a silent TV set with no sound, but it wouldn't prove that all the sounds are produced by or programmed in or stored in the components of the sound circuit that have been damaged. If someone loses memories after brain damage, concussion, injury, stroke, or degeneration through dementia like Alzheimer's, it could be that the brain is no longer able to recover these memories, rather than that the damaged parts of the brain stored the memories. And terminal lucidity suggests that might well be the case. And it might be the case that after death, people could still access memories if there's something that can access them. The memories may not be wiped out at death by the decay of the brain. The morphic resonance theory of memory can actually be tested. If it depends on resonance based on similarity, then if you train one animal to learn a new trick, then similar animals might be able to learn it quicker, or as it were, remember this learning, even though they themselves individually never learned it, by resonance with animals that did. There's already evidence that rats can pass on their learning of tricks to other rats of the same breed, even if those rats are completely unrelated, if they've not been descended from the trained rats. I discussed this in my book, The Presence of the Past, and in my course on morphic resonance. I don't have time to go into all the details here, but let me just give one human example. Humans have been doing IQ tests since around 1918, when they were first invented. And these tests involve solving a variety of puzzles. Very similar tests have been used for decades. And when I first thought of the idea of morphic resonance, I predicted that the average scores on IQ tests should be going up, not because people are getting smarter, but because the tests are getting easier because so many people have already done them. And it turned out several years later that, in fact, this is exactly what had been happening. The effect was discovered by a New Zealand psychologist called James Flynn. It's called the Flynn effect. And the Flynn effect for the US is quite dramatic. As this chart shows, the average IQ in the US between 1918 and 1989 went up by about 30%. There was no independent evidence for Americans getting 30% more intelligent. In fact, in some other criteria that involved learning as opposed to these puzzle-solving tests, they were getting worse, and people were worried that television was having a dumbing down effect on children and adults. But IQ test scores kept on increasing and still are. I think that this is because of morphic resonance. It wouldn't be possible to explain this. It isn't possible to explain it in terms of a range of cultural factors, nutritional factors, more protein, etc. People have tried and failed to explain away this puzzling effect, but it's just what you'd expect on the basis of morphic resonance. So morphic resonance leaves open the question of the survival of bodily death in the way that the materialist theory leaves it closed. Because if your memories are not stored in your brain, when your brain decays at death, your experiences can still have an effect. By morphic resonance, they'll contribute to a collective memory of all of humanity on which everyone can draw. So that they'd contribute to collective memory through a resonance effect. And if there's some part of you that can still resonate with them to an individual memory, say, for example, that survival of bodily death is rather like dreaming, a dream from which you can't wake up. This is somewhat similar to the Tibetan view and the bardos in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, these dreamlike realms after death, in which you're trapped and can't wake up from. If there's a part of you, the dream body, all of us have dream bodies every night when we dream, that can access your memories by a kind of resonance in an unknown way. I don't say this is a fully proved theory, it's just a speculation. Then memory could survive the death of the body if it's not stored in the brain. Whereas if memories are stored in the brain, there's no way they could possibly survive the death of the body. And another possibility that this resonance theory opens up is that somebody who's born after you died might for some reason tune specifically into your memories. And in fact, it's well known that in certain cases, especially in India and in other countries where people believe in reincarnation, there are cases of children who remember previous lives. Young children of 3, 4, 5 often say to their parents and to anyone who's prepared to listen what their real name is, what their real family was like, what village they came from, and so on. They have apparently clear memories of previous lives they couldn't have known by any other means. These have been scientifically investigated by teams of investigators, particularly at the University of Virginia. The original studies were done by Professor Ian Stevenson, whose books on children's memories of previous lives show a very thorough investigation that, in my opinion, convincingly show that these children were remembering things they couldn't have known otherwise. In some cases, he was there when the child was taken to the supposed previous village where they'd lived, and the child could identify by name the various members of the supposed family that they claimed to have belonged to. In one dramatic instance, even pointed to a floorboard and said that's where they'd hidden something they didn't want anyone to find, and when they pulled up the floorboard, there it was. This child could not possibly have known by normal means what it was able to say. However, if memory depends on morphic resonance, there could be a transfer of memory. Usually it's a collective transfer, and it's blurred by being absorbed into a collective memory, but occasionally there may be individual transfer from particular individuals, may be more predominant than from lots of other people, a more specific transfer of memory, which should give memory of previous lives, which is nearly always interpreted as evidence for reincarnation. That then leads to a whole debate about what does personal identity mean. If it's continuity of memory, then yes, it might be evidence for reincarnation. If it's another person who has access by resonance to the memories of someone now dead, then it may not prove that they are that person, but simply they can have access to their memories. And the Buddhists and the Hindus have been debating different interpretations of memories of past lives in their theories of reincarnation and rebirth for many centuries. So there are lots of open questions here. But the main point I want to raise here is that the idea that memories are stored in the brain, which has become a dogma, an assumption which has hardened into a dogma and was an essential part of the materialist worldview and is the dominant hypothesis or paradigm by far, almost unquestioned, within neuroscience, is actually highly questionable. It's by no means certain that memories are stored in brains, and in fact, I think the evidence strongly suggests that they're not. Of course, brains may change as a result of repeated activity, just as muscles may grow if you lift weights. There could be physical changes in brains. I'm not saying that's not possible, but I'm saying the bulk of memory is probably dependent on resonance rather than on memory traces. So let me conclude with the 4 questions for materialists on this subject that you can try out on your materialist friends or family members if they come across as cocksure that memories must be in the brain. Question 1. Do you believe that memories are stored as material traces in brains? If so, can you summarize the evidence? My guess is that if you ask that question, they'll come up with the idea that memories can be lost as a result of brain damage. That's the main evidence. But as I say, as I explained, I don't think that's evidence they're stored in brains any more than the fact you can lose particular channels or the sound on a TV set as a result of damage proves that the TV set is storing all those programs and images. Question 2. How do you think memory retrieval systems recognize the memories they are trying to retrieve from memory stores? This is the fundamental logical problem that I alluded to earlier. Memory retrieval itself requires a memory because it has to be able to recognize the memory it's retrieving. And this leads to an infinite regress. Third, have you ever considered the possibility that memory might depend on some kind of resonance rather than on material traces? And most materialists have simply never considered this possibility. They've just taken it for granted as a dogmatic assumption that memory must be stored as material traces. They may dismiss the resonance idea out of hand, but very few of them have considered the evidence. They simply take the conventional theory for granted. And finally, is the trace theory of memory a testable hypothesis rather than a dogma? How could it be established experimentally that memory depends on traces rather than resonance? Right now, the trace theory people just assume that it depends on traces, and when they fail to find them over and over again, they just assume they must be somewhere else. They don't attempt to distinguish or do experiments that could refute their own hypothesis, even though many of them may claim science involves being able to refute hypotheses. They don't think it's a refutable hypothesis. They think it's a certain truth. But if challenged, how could they actually establish that it's in traces rather than by resonance? Because most of the evidence for memory can be explained just as well, if not better, by resonance than by traces. And the only reason they get away with continued adherence to the trace theory is by simply ignoring or simply being ignorant of the possibility of any alternative. So, again, this is an open question. What seems like a dogmatic truth, memories are stored in brains, on examination turns out to be an open question, and one that leaves tremendous amount of scope for further research and inquiry.
Find out more on advire.life.